All right, I want you to imagine stepping into a vast, echoing hall. The air around you is thick with the scent of burning beeswax, sweet rosewater, and roasted game. Right in front of you, hundreds of people are draped in heavy silks, illuminated by the flickering light of literally 1,000 candles. We're stepping into the highly sensory, intensely political world of the early modern European court. And throughout this explainer, we are going to have to leave all of our modern assumptions about dining at the door. Because you see, this was not just dinner. It was a carefully engineered mechanism of survival, dominance, and social control. So what exactly happens when a meal is designed not to nourish, but to conquer? To really understand this era, we have to completely challenge the concept of a simple gathering. In the Renaissance, the banquet table essentially became a bloodless battlefield. We're talking about an age where outright warfare was unpredictable and ruinously expensive. So the banquet became this absolutely crucial instrument to establish geopolitical hegemony. To host poorly, well, that was to invite contempt and potentially even military aggression. But to host magnificently meant you could conquer your rivals without drawing a single sword.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the architecture of power. Now, the banquet table was essentially a projection plane for the ruling class. It was a place where their authority was made visible, tangible, and, well, consumable. And the scale of this excess was just staggering. For example, in 1457, Count Gaston IV of Foix hosted a massive feast in Tours, France, to welcome the Hungarian king. We are talking about over 300 highly influential guests, 7 massive courses, and a dazzling array of entertainment. But make no mistake, this was no mere welcoming party. It was explicitly designed to cement a multinational alliance and downright terrify their geopolitical enemy, the Duke of Burgundy. The sheer abundance on that table was a direct threat. It was a demonstration of resources so vast that challenging them in war would be completely foolish.
And this political extravagance was deeply tied to the rise of humanism. Dynastic families, like the Medici in Florence or the Sforza in Milan, they really started to shift away from the crude, chaotic feasts of the Middle Ages. Instead, they engaged in this intellectual battleground of taste and magnificence. You see, the ideal Renaissance ruler couldn't just rely on brute strength anymore. They had to demonstrate a profound cultural superiority, classical knowledge, and total aesthetic perfection.
Moving on to Section 2, the labor of the feast.
Of course, this illusion of effortless magnificence came at a truly immense human cost. We have to peel back the curtain on the invisible workforce that made all of this theater possible. To give you an idea, at a 1538 Portuguese royal wedding, the court demanded the labor of 110 cooks working for 15 days straight. Just consider the sheer physical toll extracted from these ordinary people. They were plucking thousands of birds, hauling massive timber logs for the roaring fires, butchering whole carcasses, and managing immense cauldrons of boiling water, all entirely without modern refrigeration or mechanization. It was a grueling, relentless exertion of human energy.
So above stairs lay the serene, perfumed space of the dining hall, filled with the gentle sounds of lutes and the scent of jasmine. But below stairs, an entirely different world existed. It was a chaotic, sweltering, fiercely disciplined environment. The kitchen was a realm of extreme heat, deafening noise, and rampant thievery. The head cook, known as the Maestro del Tinello, ruled the space almost like a military general, over a really noisy brigade of undercooks and scullery hands, just doing everything possible to ensure that out of this blazing inferno, perfectly ordered dishes emerged right on time.
And to prevent a total collapse, this workforce had to operate under rigid, almost martial hierarchies. You had the sculco, or steward, who masterminded the logistics in the menu. The undercooks executed his vision down in the blistering heat of the hearths. Yet the climax of all this labor actually occurred back up in the dining hall with the trinciante, the master carver. Often a nobleman himself, the carver possessed immense martial skill. Masters of the craft would actually carve roasted meats in area, meaning they were literally holding a bird aloft on a fork and slicing it mid-air with a sword, so that thin, perfect slices cascaded right onto the Lord's plate. It was a display of deadly precision, cleverly disguised as dinner service.
Which brings us to Section 3, a theater for the senses.
Let's stay in the dining hall for a moment, because here we see exactly how food functioned as a highly codified canvas for art and ideology. Renaissance aesthetics basically dictated that diners didn't just taste their food, they read it.
Cooks manipulated ingredients to communicate very specific political messages before a single bite was even taken. They'd use impossibly expensive saffron to dye dishes a radiant gold, signaling divinity and limitless wealth. Spinach and berries were used to create vibrant greens and reds to denote power and passion, while almond milk and sugar yielded these brilliant whites representing purity. The guests were quite literally consuming their host's political propaganda. And to maintain order amid all of this excess, the meal followed a really rigorous architectural choreography. Courses alternated strictly between two types of service. First, you had the servizi di credenza. These were cold courses managed from the sideboards. Things like cured meats, complex salads, marzipan, and delicate sweet pastries. And these would alternate with the servizi di cucina, which were the hot kitchen courses of roasted game, stews, and savory pies brought directly from the fires. This rhythm was crucial. It prevented the palate from becoming exhausted and ensured the massive kitchen operation down below didn't just collapse under its own weight. Honestly, such rigorous pacing was absolutely essential because attending these banquets demanded grueling physical endurance. Take the famous 1529 Ferrara fish banquet hosted by Ippolito d'Este. Guests arrived at dusk and were subjected to this exhausting sensory overload of endless courses, musical performances, and theatrical interludes that lasted straight through until dawn. It was a true test of aristocratic stamina. Attendees had to remain composed, witty, and perfectly postured for 8 to 10 hours while consuming vast amounts of rich food and wine. The sensory extravagance of those incredibly long nights is probably best embodied by the iconic peacock dish. Kitchen laborers would carefully skin the bird, roast the meat, and then painstakingly redress the cooked flesh in its original iridescent plumage. Served upright with its tail feathers splayed out like a fan, it was a wildly potent symbol. The glorious feathers represented imperial, secular power, while the supposedly incorruptible flesh of the peacock symbolized Christian immortality. It was an absolute masterpiece of culinary engineering that left guests in total awe. All right, Section 4, Monuments of Sugar and Silver. This is where the dining table literally served as a projection plane for political narratives through the introduction of triumphi da tavola, or triumphs of the table. Now, these were not just your standard floral arrangements. They were incredibly elaborate, ephemeral centerpieces depicting mythological gods, family crests, or architectural scenes. They were crafted by master artisans out of sugar paste, marzipan, butter, and sometimes even precious metals. Just picture gilded meat pies and sugar paste dragons, so meticulously detailed they looked exactly like marble sculptures, placed right in the center of the table to dazzle guests and spark philosophical discourse. The absolute political zenith of this practice happened at the 1674 Versailles Medianoche, a midnight feast. The designer, Luigi Vigorani, built an 18-foot hollow column right in the middle of the dining table, modeled entirely on Trajan's triumphal column in Rome, and wrapped it in 600 burning candles. This unambiguously asserted French sovereign dominion. It basically declared to everyone at that table that King Louis XIV was the new Roman emperor, celebrating his recent military victory over the French Comte. But skip ahead a century to the 1768 Zvetel Monastery in Austria, and we see how this shared European visual vocabulary of power was flexibly adapted for an ecclesiastical jubilee. Instead of a towering military monument, we see over 100 exquisite white porcelain figures, representing the liberal arts, classical mythology, and the cardinal virtues. It proved that this highly sophisticated table ornamentation could project monastic virtue and intellectual wealth just as powerfully as it ever projected military might. And this all brings us to the contemporary French concept of representation. You see, these centerpieces were never merely decorative. According to the thinkers of the time, they were deeply political mechanisms. They didn't just sit there looking pretty, they actively enacted the host's power and identity. When a guest saw beneath an 18-foot glowing column at Versailles, the king's absolute power wasn't just some abstract concept, it was a physical reality pressing down upon them as they ate. Finally, Section 5, the legacy of the banquet. So what does this all mean for us today? Well, this era of sovereign excess actually laid the permanent groundwork for modern gastronomy, particularly in the evolution of labor. That chaotic, rigidly hierarchical Renaissance kitchen, led by the steward and the head cook, eventually codified. By the 19th century, as the aristocracy started to decline and public restaurants rose up, this brutal but highly effective system evolved into the structured Parisian brigade system. That's the precise hierarchy of executive chefs, sous chefs, and specialized stations that commands professional kitchens around the entire world today.
The historical through lines here are just absolutely undeniable. We can trace a direct path from those Renaissance humanists straight to today's Michelin-starred dining experiences. Think about it. Their intense focus on the highest quality, hyper-regional ingredients, that's the direct ancestor of the modern farm-to-table movement. The highly choreographed alternating credenza and cucina services, that gave birth to the sequential tasting menu. And the absolute insistence that food must convey visual beauty and adhere to color theory survives right now in the modern chef's dedication to plating as a high visual art.
As this explainer of the historical record hopefully demonstrates, the Renaissance banquet was the ultimate intersection of human behavior, societal constraints, and political communication. It was a world where art, science, and sensory pleasure were meticulously weaponized to establish hierarchy and ensure survival in a deeply competitive landscape. We've seen how the grand feasts of the past were quite literally designed to manipulate the minds and the stomachs of those who attended. The architecture of power might look a bit different today, but the social dynamics of dining remain deeply ingrained in us. So next time you sit down for a highly curated, multi-course meal, ask yourself, whose power are you really consuming? Keep exploring the past with us, because as you've seen, it is always present, right there on our plates.